Well, this morning we're going to start a new series together looking at the book of Exodus and seeing how God is taking his people on a journey through the wilderness, but also how God works in the journey of our lives. And that we all are on a journey together, but a journey with God, with his purpose to shape us, to mold us, and to guide us as his people. And so let's turn this morning to our Bibles in Exodus chapters 1 and 2. Let's turn to the book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Old Testament. And this week and next week we'll be looking at the life of Moses. As we think of the many great men and women of the faith, maybe one of the first to come to mind is Moses. Maybe he's considered the most, if not the second most important figure in all of the Old Testament. And maybe we think of him as a great man of courage and of faith, but we know that he was not always like that. In fact, he had a long journey of his life. God brought him through many ups and downs, successes and failures. But through it all, God was working in his life. So let's take a look at Moses this morning, starting from Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. Follow along as I read. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went out to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Let's pause right there. So we see here from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people of God were growing and growing. And we see that Jacob had 12 sons that eventually became the 12 tribes of Israel. And because you may remember back in the story of Joseph, the people were in Egypt because of the famine. And they were growing and growing so large that the king of Egypt began to fear them and decided to enslave them, even going to the point of throwing all of the baby boys into the river. But yet even in the midst of this, many were saved. Let's read on in chapter 2. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Pause right there. So we see that there is this Hebrew couple name that we'll see later, named Amram and Jochebed, Amram and Jochebed. And so they have this beautiful baby boy that is born, but instead of allowing him to be killed with the other baby boys, he was hidden. He was hidden. And we can imagine this is an act of desperation by caring parents. Right? Just think about that, having your firstborn child and just doing everything you can to protect him and, from being executed by a crazed, maniacal king. And after a few months, he grows up, he grows larger, but they realize we can't hide him anymore. We can't hide him anymore. And so they make a difficult decision, something no parent would ever want to do. They put him in a basket and send him down the river, just in hopes that he might survive. And in fact, that he does survive. He's picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter, eventually adopted into the Pharaoh's own family. And by a turn of chance, or the providence of God, they hire his own mother, Jochebed, to nurse him and to raise him. And so we see that Moses is protected. Even from the first days of his birth, we see that God is working in Moses' life. God is protecting him. God is unfolding his plan and purposes for Moses. And here we see that Moses is in a very unique position. He's living with a double identity. On one hand, he is a Hebrew, the people of God, a Jewish person. But on the other hand, he's raised as an Egyptian. And we see that God is kind of molding and shaping Moses' life for what is to come. And even in this early days, we see that God has a plan and a purpose for Moses' future. And we see this reminds us of what God is doing in our life, that each of us is on a journey with God, and that he's taking us on a certain path with his plans in place for us. That each and every one of us, God knows us. He created us for a purpose. Our lives are not simply an accident. There's a famous atheist author named Richard Dawkins, and he was asked the question, do you think life has a purpose? And this was his response. It's kind of small, I'll read it to you. In answering the question about the meaning of life, he says this. He says, the answer is, it has none. Life has no meaning. Your life may feel like a big deal to you, but it's actually a random blip of matter and energy in an uncaring and impersonal universe. When it ends, few people will remember you for a while, but maybe they will die too. Even if you make the history books, your contributions will soon be forgotten. Humans will go extinct. Earth and the sun will be destroyed. Eventually, the universe itself will end. Against this appalling reality, how can human life have any real meaning? The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Basically, what this atheist author is saying is our lives have no meaning and purpose. There is no trajectory, there's no story to our lives. We're here just an act by accident. We're just a bunch of molecules bouncing around, and one day we will be gone ourselves. And this is a view of a life without God in perspective. But the Christian view is very, very different. The Bible tells us that God has a plan and purpose for each one of us. Right? Not that we'll become famous or some kind of rich influencer, but that God has put us here, right now, here today, in this time and place, for a reason. God has purposes for each and every one of us. And for many of us, we may never see the bigger picture of why God put us here until we return to our heavenly home. We may not all change the world, but God has a reason for us. God has a reason for putting us here. And God knows each and every one of us. Listen to the words of the psalmist in Psalm 139. It says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." I love that last verse, verse 16. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Right? Even before we came into this world, even before we were given birth to, God knew us. God shaped us. God had a plan. He had a story for us already written in his book before we even breathed our first breath. And just imagine that God has a story written for each and every one of us. And our calling, our task is to just understand and to, follow God as he's unfolding this story of our lives, to follow along with him as he takes us along this journey that he has for us. As believers, we know that nothing in this life is an accident. Nothing just happens by good luck or chance, but everything happens under God's order and permission. Every aspect of our lives, every detail to the smallest thing, is part of God's story for us. And as we look at the life of Moses, we see that God's plan is beginning to unfold for him. Let's read on in chapter 2, verse 11. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them in their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me just as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So we see here that Moses is raised up in the house of the king. He's raised up as the son of Pharaoh. And one day he sees a slave driver beating a Hebrew man, right, one of the slaves. And we see that he is angered, right? He's seeing his own people being mistreated and oppressed. And so what does he do? He defends his people. He's filled with the sense of injustice, and he fights back, even going to kill this slave driver. And as he commits this murder, he hides the body, and he thinks that he's gotten away with it. But he soon finds out that he has not. And another day comes by, and he sees 2 of his own people fighting. And again, he goes and tries to stop them, but he's called out. He's called out by them. "Who do you think you are, Moses? You're not one of us. You're not one of us. Why don't you get off your high horse, because we know who you really are. Are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian? Right? You're not one of us, Moses. You were raised in the palace, not in the fields. Get out of here with who you think you are." And so Moses, he realizes that he's being rejected by his own people too. Right? Not only is he not an Egyptian, but he's not a Hebrew either. Right? He's not accepted by either group. And as his crime comes to light, he realizes that he has no other choice but to flee for his life, to run into the wilderness. And we see an image of Moses sitting by this well. And I just imagine Moses staring at that well saying, what have I done to get to this point? Right? He lost his temper. He tried to hide. He eventually was called out by his own people and rejected. And now he's just running. He's running into the wilderness for his life. Right? Not only does he not belong to his first family or his second family, but now he has no family around him. And his world begins to fall apart. And here he is, a stranger in a strange land, looking at his failures, maybe looking with regret at what he's done, maybe looking at his life with shame, being all alone now, thinking, is this the end of my story? Is this the end of my story? God, what have I done with my life? But we see for Moses, this is not the end of the story. In fact, it's just a turning point. But God is still working. God's plan is still unfolding. And so God brings him into a new family, his third family now. And God gives him a wife and a child, and he gives him a new home and a new place of belonging. And as we understand that Moses stayed in this place for about 40 years. This is like a second lifetime for him. But we see that this is, again, not the end of his story. God is, in fact, preparing him for something bigger, for something greater to come. And God hears the suffering of his people, and he has a plan to use Moses to save them. And eventually, Moses will be used in one of the greatest acts of God in the entire Bible to deliver the people out of slavery. But Moses is not there yet. He's not there yet. His story is still unfinished. God is still doing something in him. God is still working out his plans for Moses. And we'll see more of that next week. So come back, don't miss that. But just a few lessons as we look at Moses' first 2 chapters in his story. And the first lesson is that God works even in our failures. God is at work even in our failures. Maybe sometimes in our life we feel like Moses sitting by that well, right? Just staring, saying, God, how could I have come to this place? How could I have messed things up so bad? Maybe like Moses, we're just living in shame or fear. Maybe we're just running. Maybe we're confused or lost. We're holding on to regret. And maybe sometimes we find ourselves in a place where we think, God, is this the end of my story? Right? Is this all that I have left to look at? But we see in the life of Moses that God has a plan even in our failures. Right? Failure is not the end. But God has a purpose even when we fail. And one of his primary purpose is to bring us closer to himself. Right? God uses our failures in our life, not to shame us or to bring us down, but to bring us closer to him. Right? Why did God bring Moses into the wilderness? Right? We can say, well, it was because of Moses' bad choices, his own fear of running away. But actually, no, this was part of God's plan for him. I believe that God brought Moses into the wilderness to bring him closer to himself. Right? This time in the wilderness was an opportunity for him to meet and to grow closer to God. Right? We don't really know how Moses grew up. Right? Was he taught about God? Was he taught about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? We don't really know. We don't know if he was taught about the truths of the one true God. But whatever happened in his previous life, we see that God was using this time to bring him closer, to meet with him in the wilderness. And we'll see next week how God speaks to Moses through the burning bush, revealing his identity to Moses. But this time in the wilderness for Moses is a time of shaping and molding his relationship with God. I believe that God was using this time to bring him out of the life that he knew, the life in Egypt, into a new place, to bring him closer to his heavenly Father, and to strip away what was holding him back, and to open the door for the new purposes that God had for him. I believe that God does the same thing for us in our times of failure, that he uses our struggles and our challenges to strip away what we're holding on to and to bring us closer to him, to bring us into a new reality of what he has for us, to shape our identity in him and in him alone. I see that Moses wouldn't have been the same person he was without his time in the wilderness. He wouldn't have known God in the same way. But God used this opportunity to draw him closer. We see many men and women in the Bible who God brought into times of wilderness. Another great man of the Old Testament is Elijah. And we see that Elijah came to a point in his life where God had been using him to fight some very great challenges and battles against another evil king and his wife. But he came to a place where he was so discouraged. And in 1 Kings 19, it says that Elijah came to a broom bush, sat under it, and prayed that he might die. He said, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. And this is how low Elijah was, even though he was a great man of God, even though God was doing amazing miracles through him. But he was so discouraged that he said, God, I'm ready to end my life. God, I'm so done with this. But what did God do in that moment? And we read on in 1 Kings 19 that God brought him to a secluded place in the wilderness. And there he showed him a great earthquake and a fire. But even after all those things, he heard God's voice in a gentle whisper. And when God spoke to Elijah, he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah, in the wilderness?" He was recognizing who Elijah was, where he had come from, and what he had for him in store. And even though Elijah wanted to give up, God had greater plans for him. This time in the wilderness was a time of drawing him closer to God, reminding him that God was in control, that he was still there, that he was not alone, that God was still caring for him and watching over him and had not given up on him. And God used this wilderness time in Elijah's life to bring him closer and to remind him of his presence. We see that as God brings us into the wilderness, he not only draws us closer, but he uses the wilderness to redeem our failures. Yes, Moses found himself in the pit of guilt and shame. Like many of the great men and women of faith in the Bible, he experienced failures. But God used that time to redeem his failure. We see just as David committed adultery when he was king, God used that opportunity to redeem him, to make him an even greater king. We see that Peter betrayed Jesus and denied him, but yet God used that as an opportunity to redeem his life and to use him as a great leader in the church. Paul, the apostle, was a persecutor of Christians, an enemy of God, but yet God used that as a testimony in Paul's life. We see that God brings us into the wilderness to redeem us from our failures, not to leave us in our shame. And when God brings us into the wilderness, is to humble us so that we're not dependent on ourselves, but it teaches us to trust him. It teaches us to go to God for healing, for renewal, and restoration. God doesn't just leave us in our guilt and shame, but he brings us to a new beginning. God can use even the darkest places in our life to bring us to a place of renewal. Many of us know about the story of Thomas Edison, the great inventor. He invented the microphone, the light bulb, talking movies, and thousands of other inventions. In December 1914, Thomas Edison was working on a storage battery, something to store electricity. And he had been working on this battery for over 10 years. He'd been putting all his money and resources into this development of the battery. But one evening, a great fire broke out in his laboratory. And everything that he had been working on within a few minutes was all consumed by fire. All of his prototypes, all of his experiments, all of his materials, they were completely burned down. It was said that the heat was so intense that any attempts that the firefighters made, any water they sprayed on, was immediately evaporated, and their efforts were futile. And here at the age of 67, Thomas Edison lost everything that he had. All of his life's work had been destroyed, and he had almost no resources left to his name. The next morning when he woke up, his family came to him, worried about him, afraid that he would be ready to give up. But this is what he said. He said, "There is great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." All right? What an interesting viewpoint. There's great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. And then we can start over anew. We can start anew. And I don't know if Thomas Edison was a believer or not, but I think this is a beautiful picture of redemption. That God brings us through our failures and our struggles, and he burns them up as a way for us to begin anew. He redeems us into a new life that we begin with him day after day, again and again. 3 weeks after the fire, Thomas Edison managed to invent the first phonograph, one of his most famous inventions. And so this time of restoration for him was a new beginning. Somebody once said, "Failure is never final with the Father." Failure is never final with the Father. No matter how great we fail, God has a new beginning for us. He wants to redeem us. He wants to bring us back again. One final thought this morning is that God uses the wilderness to grow us. God uses the wilderness to grow us. Many of us want to grow. We want to grow more mature. We want to grow more patient. We want to grow our faith to be more trusting in God. But that growth doesn't just come easily. It doesn't come automatically. But God uses the wilderness to grow us. He brings us through times of difficulty and struggle and even lostness to bring us back to him, to mold us and to shape us, to trust him more, and to sand down those rough edges of our life and our character so that we can be more and more like Jesus. Here, as Moses is in the wilderness, God is shaping his life. He's teaching him to trust, to listen, to be patient, and to wait on God. And when we're in the wilderness, God does the same for us. Even though we may not see the fruit right away, those times in the wilderness are precious times where we see God's hands molding and shaping our lives. Many of us know that bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants on the earth. Right? It grows up to sometimes a foot every single day. Right? Bamboo can grow very, very quickly. But the thing about bamboo is if you take a stalk of bamboo or you take a root and you plant it in the ground, you won't see growth right away. And that stalk of bamboo or that root may sit underground for weeks, months, even years before you see any new stalks coming out of the ground. But then one day, unexpectedly, suddenly you won't see one stalk popping out, but you'll see many, many stalks of bamboo just shooting out of the ground all around, even far from where you planted that first sprout. And what has happened? In those times of dormancy, the roots of the bamboo have spread deep underground. In fact, they've grown wide, far and wide. And eventually, when the time is right, then the stalks of bamboo grow, and they grow quickly. And for some of us, that time of wilderness is that time of like the roots spreading underground. We may not see anything coming out. We may not see God changing our lives overnight, but God is using that time to produce fruit in us, to produce a greater fruit that eventually will be demonstrated in our lives. Someone said it like this: the spiritual fruit for which we often pray is fertilized by adversity. Right? The fruit that we want to see in our life is fertilized by adversity. If you want to see God working in your life, let him take you through that wilderness. Let him take you through that time of shaping and molding. If I could leave you with one thought this morning, is that God can use everything. God can use it all. God can use our good times. God can use our hard times. God can use our highs. He can use our lows. He can use our times of joy and our times of crisis. He can use our times of courage and our times of fear, because God's purpose is never thwarted. God has a plan for each and every one of us to shape our lives for his glory. And for us as his people, we need to understand that God is at work. He's got us on a journey, and he's not finished yet. He's working in our times of darkness, pain, and uncertainty. And even if we can't see what is ahead, we know that God does. God knows, and God has a plan for us. One last quote from the great Christian author J.I. Packer. He says, "Guidance, like all of God's acts of blessing under the covenant of grace, is a sovereign act. Not merely does God will to guide us in the sense of showing us his way, that we may tread on it. He also wills to guide us in the more fundamental sense of ensuring that whatever happens, whatever mistakes we make, we shall come safely home. Slipping and strayings there will be, no doubt, but the everlasting arms are beneath us. We shall be caught, rescued, and restored. This is God's promise. This is how good he is." And I love that. Whatever mistakes we may make, God will bring us safely home. No matter what wilderness he takes us through, God will bring us back. Whatever slippings and strayings we may have, he'll catch us with his everlasting arms. What a beautiful picture. Like a child jumping off the edge of a pool, being ready to be caught by his Father. And that's how good God is to us. And no matter where we are, no matter where we've been, God is with us. God has got us on his journey. God is still working in us. And the story is not done yet. It's unfinished. This morning, if you find yourself in a place of wilderness, I want to encourage you. Trust what God is doing. Trust his purpose. Surrender to him. Let him do his work in us. And believe that he will catch us in the end. God is drawing us closer. He's working in us. He's shaping us for his purpose. Let's bow our heads together. Father, as we come this morning, we thank you that you are God at work. Lord, that you're not a distant, faraway God who just leaves us to live our life on our own. But Lord, that you have an unfolding story for each and every one of us. And Lord, this morning, if some of us find ourselves in a difficult place or an uncertain place, a place of waiting or just not knowing what's ahead. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to just trust you, to trust your work in us, and to know that you are good. You love us, you care for us. And Lord, this morning, if we're in a place of joy and celebration, we also thank you for that. We just ask that you grow our faith stronger to prepare us for the difficult times ahead, and just to know that you're at work even in the good times. And so, Lord, this morning we give you praise, we give you glory, we give you thanks for all that you are, all that you've done, and all that you will do. We thank you, Lord. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.